Ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot of content on chess YouTube revolving around Magnus Carlsen. Yours truly is guilty of promoting quite a bit of it. But that's because he's an exceptional chess talent, generational. He's the best player of this generation and arguably ever. But sometimes, even Magnus has setbacks. And that's actually the point of this video. Recently, he played a game in the Norwegian league, and it was a shocking result, you might say. Before we jump into the game, though, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Fabulous. Fabulous is the #1 self-care app to help you build better habits and achieve your goals. Wouldn't it be great if we were all motivated, organized, productive, and happy with our work? That's pretty difficult to accomplish in chess, but in real life, all it takes is baby steps. And on Fabulous, there are two approaches, the self-guided one and one with a guided coach. There's many features on the app. For example, if you use Fabulous Journeys, you can use them to feel more energized, or to sleep better, or to improve your focus and concentration. You can also try a Fabulous challenge. An example of that is something like the 7-day gratitude one, where every day you do a thing or two, and by the end of it, it can help with things like intrusive negative thoughts. And you can take everything you do on Fabulous and interact with the community. The app has something called circles, where people post their progress, comment on one another, and it's just a nice little area of positive reinforcement. So you can start building your ideal routine today. All you gotta do is click the link in the description and you will get 25% off a Fabulous subscription. So what are you waiting for? Isn't it time to go make yourself feel fabulous? The interesting thing right before we do, I just want to say both of these guys played against each other in a Norwegian Junior Championship like over a decade ago. Magnus was a sub 1000 rated player and he drew Geir Sune, whose name I believe is pronounced that way. He drew him when he was 2200. Now I can only imagine what the hell that felt like. That probably felt terrible. Yeah, I mean, we are going to get the game going here with the move e4, and black plays c6. So I already like where this is going. Now it's always interesting to see, how does Magnus play against the person 400 points higher rated than? He goes for this variation of the Caro-Kann. Now, this doesn't have a name. This got popular relatively recently in the age of supercomputers. Normally in the Caro-Kann, white, traditionally speaking, will put 2 pawns in the center. But by playing the move d3, you invite a position that looks like this, where you have a queenless middle game. This is still a middle game because only queens have been traded. You still have a full army of knights, bishops, and rooks. But there is an inherent imbalance in pawn structure. White has played a much more natural move, e4, which is good almost all the time, and then will develop in a natural way. This, however, is a problem for black because black doesn't get the traditional knight development and has a little bit of an issue here, actually. It's kind of difficult to find where to go. For example, if black plays bishop g4, which you would love to play, at some point you're going to have to give away this bishop. That's just the truth. Like if white even plays h3, hanging around here could just be a problem because you can get your bishop locked away. You can get your bishop locked away and potentially even trapped in the future. Knight fd2 is maybe not so good because of h5, but knight bd2 is actually completely fine. So you do have to be a little bit careful with how you play this with black, but that is the entire point of this move d3. Now, normally here with black, I just play g6. I don't play into the hands of white. I try to keep as many pieces on the board as possible, but our opponents dash into this position with no queens, and here black doesn't play knight f6 or bishop g4, which I believe are the two main lines. Black plays knight to d7. Bishop g4 might not be a main line in that position. Might be a main line after d3, but whatever. So knight d7. I mean, the point of knight d7 is you're obviously looking more long-term. You might go here, but you also might move this knight somewhere else, and you also might build up to try to have a pawn in the center as well. Now, play here can develop in a handful of ways. One of those ways is a4. And this is what I mean, like you need to have a really high level of understanding of why the hell the move a4 even makes any sense. Why are you not moving the knights? Why are you not moving the bishops? a4 is a move that's just playing against the potential knight expansion to the queen side, but the other idea is that, again, it's a game of structure. So a move like a5 in the future could actually be very useful to undermine and pressure the pawn structure of black. Also, a4 will bring a rook out. I'm not even joking, like not right away because you're going to lose a rook, but you have a lot of long-term ideas, actually, with some sort of flank expansion like this. Traditional principles of playing for the middle kind of don't apply anymore because you already traded the queens. So, and your king is not really in any danger. Magnus plays knight bd2. Knight fd2 is another move that is played in similar positions, but e5, knight c4, and by the 8th move, we have a game that's never ever occurred. So Magnus brings his f knight back to d2, which just looks unbelievably dumb if you've never seen something like this before. There is a point though. The point is that White's game plan is after you've solidified the center, you are going to expand on the queen side. You will then move this knight behind the pawns, so the pawns go forward and then the knight, then the bishop comes out, and White will play this game and try to win the game on the queen side. Because White is faster to transfer the pieces that way. A move like b5 by Black is not good because the knight will jump in and immediately you have a problem. If you push that pawn forward, I take this pawn. All it takes is one pawn against Magnus. That's the end of the game, so you can't even defend anymore, right? So Black plays knight c5, which is a very reasonable move. Magnus does, in fact, go for this a4 idea. Now, again, Black does not play a5. There is no need to try to match with Magnus, because after knight b6, first of all, at the very least, I get the bishop pair, and I'm just clearly better, and I also don't even have to take the bishop. I mean, I can just play like knight c4, f3, knight c4, and try to win your a5 pawn. So, again, it all comes down to tiny, tiny things. So we have bishop e6, Magnus goes for b4, and I'm just going to say this right now, I would hate to have this position against Magnus, because I already see the 10 million, 13 million, whatever, Doctor Strange reference scenarios where I lose in every single one of them, all right? Like, I mean, you're just going to get expanded there on the queen side. It's a very annoying opening, this d3 Caro-Kann. Now, I wouldn't recommend that you try this. I mean, you can, but you're not going to play this like Magnus. I mean, you can't just say, well, I've sacrificed my right to castle for a lead in development and better center control. No, I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend, you know, taking space, playing for the center, not doing what Magnus is doing. This is a very unique case. So knight h6, knight f7. Notice that Magnus moves his king off the center line and plays knight b3. Black here plays knight d6. So he has arrived to trade the knight, and Magnus obliges. The problem with this is that even though you seemingly have done a completely normal thing, the move knight a5 is still exceptionally annoying. The point is you can't really guard this pawn by moving it, because then you lose c6. You also probably should not play rook b8, because that move just sucks. Like, what? It doesn't help you. You still can't move. Bishop e3 comes. I mean, maybe you can go c5, but here comes rook d1 at any moment, b5. I'm going to trade light-squared bishops with you, right? So in this position, we have a symmetrical pawn structure, actually, like ABC, that neither player has a d-pawn, right? But one guy has more space. One guy is actually creating tangible threats. And also, that same guy is named Magnus Carlsen. That's kind of an asset, right? Long castles. Okay, fantastic. And Magnus trades the light-squared bishop. He trades the light-squared bishop. Why? Well, first of all, he still maintains an initiative. Every move that he's making is improving his position a little bit and creating threats, right? So the bishop goes back to e7. Magnus plays bishop e3. And Black can defend with here or b6. He chooses to play b6. Fantastic. Okay, so White is clearly better. Why is White clearly better? White has more space and is creating tangible threats, okay? Much more active pieces. Also, a slightly more active, slightly better king for White. This king is actually a little bit weak. Why? Well, because it's clear that White is going to try to win on the queen side, right? That's what White is trying to do. And in attacking the queen side, White is going to attack a king, because there's a king there. Now, if the king was on this side, okay, then yeah, obviously Black's king is completely safe. But because White's entire game plan here revolves around queenside pressure, well, it just so happens there's a king there. So that means that when White gets through, he doesn't just get like a little gold coin, he will get the king's head. He will chop it off. I mean, I don't know how violent Magnus is, right? But, okay, so now what? We bring the rook that hasn't been involved in the game to the open file. Obviously can't complain about that. King c7. And at this point, the obvious move to play here is a5. Why is it not b5, you ask? Great question, because you surrender c5. So it's all about the restriction of the enemy pieces. b5, it's not that Black will go c5. No. That is losing. You can't allow this. But you cannot allow Black to begin reactivating all the material, because then your advantage is gone. So Magnus plays a5. Now, Black would love to go b5. Because the thing about this move b5 is, if Magnus retreats, Black gets to play a6 and get a temporary illusion that the initiative has been thwarted. Now, the only way that initiative is really thwarted is if white can't ever make progress. So, for example, let's just give a couple of dumb moves to the opponent. This is good for black, because that means that white no longer has any pawn mobility on the queen side. Probably black equalizes effortlessly. However, that is impossible, because the very next thing Magnus will do is prevent c5 from ever happening and crack c4 open when he gets a chance. So black does want to play b5, absolutely. Absolutely wants to play b5. So why would Magnus allow it? Well, because Magnus had no intention of retreating. He had no intention of going back to b2. Magnus here calculated a tactic. Lo and behold, 2865 rated player, arguably the greatest chess player who's ever lived, finds a tactic. Knight into b6. And like I always say, if a move looks impossible and it gets played, well, and guess the elo, it's probably bad. But in this case, it's probably not bad at all. Now, knight b6 is an offering. If you take my horsey, I take. Your king is hit, my rook is active. Now, if you play a move like king to b8, you don't take. You just play king b8. My game plan now is rook a6, rook here, and some sort of mate. I am just threatening a violent mate. So just so you understand, it's just a devastating attack. Looks very scary. Black actually can defend this. It's not game over. Black can defend this by sacking at some point to give the knight back. But that is not something you really want to get yourself into when knight b6 occurs. When Magnus plays knight b6, you sort of assume he's calculated how good AB is, so you look for an alternative, which is why his opponent played knight b8. However, knight b8 is a very bad move, but it's almost impossible to see why. Almost impossible. In fact, they both miss it. Magnus does not find the win here, which is kind of shocking, but that's why the video is named what it's named. Magnus here can actually win the game with the move a6. That is incredible. What is the point? If you take, then I have rook takes rook, and a7. And you win. You win because you're threatening to queen. The only way to stop this is to play knight a6 so that the rook doesn't defend the pawn anymore, and you get a position that looks like this. And if rook a7, rook c6, or rook b5 takes, count the pawns, Magnus has 6, black has 5. Still draw a bull, but with same color bishop, probably not, I don't know. Gonna be significantly harder. Probably a6 is just winning. Probably. However, Magnus plays rook takes d8. He does it first, and then he plays a6. But there's a difference. Because now black can take with the knight. Now you say, Levy, I don't understand the difference. Why can't he just do this now? The difference is that rook a6 now, well, it's just a fundamentally different position. So, like, I'm actually threatening attacks on the king. The bishop is not on d8, right? So if AB, you lose the bishop. What happens in the game is that because Magnus goes for this idea a move later, now this works. Because rook a6 doesn't quite work, folks. And it's not for the reason you would think. It's not a b6. There's this incredible defensive resource, king b7, which black must have spotted, right? That's probably, so this 2466 superstar finds this incredible defensive resource, which is why the positioning of the bishop matters, and somehow white's pieces just don't make sense together. They just don't make sense. So, bishop d8, a6, takes, Magnus jumps back to c4. Why is he jumping back to c4? Well, because he has an attack on the pawn, he has an attack on the knight, and he's still better. He's still the one pressuring, but black is defending. I mean, this is, you know, this is somebody actually standing up to Thanos. Very difficult position because it's almost impossible to defend. If you play king b7, I check you, then I'm going to win your knight, then I'm going to win your pawns. So, for example, king c7, I have knight b5, and then I take, and then I win your other pawn, but I also have this. So I attack 1, 2, and 3. So all 3 things in your position are up for capture. You're just going to lose material. So instead of that, we get the following endgame, right? Where, for a very brief moment, just half a move, black is a pawn up, but he's going to lose a7, right? So we have king d7, and rook takes a7, and the bishop blocks. Now, you would love to do this and then rook c8, and then say boom, 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 boom. The problem is, this is a draw. Even though black has a very ugly pawn structure, if white tries to infiltrate with the king, and this is why you have to study your king and pawn endgames, if white tries to infiltrate, then the king just meets the king right here. So there's no infiltration. If you allow the infiltration, you're an idiot. So that, you know, the king is going to get there at some point. And then 4-on-4 just doesn't work. Like, 4 equally matched things just can't beat each other, unless, again, you're an idiot, which neither of these players are. So because that doesn't happen, Magnus has to begin a second front of attack. He needs to take some sort of space over here, because in endgames, you need to create 2 weaknesses. Right now, black definitely is suffering on the pawn structure side. King is also a little sus. But Magnus wants to attack over here, so he plays f4. Here, black plays a great move. He unpins himself with the move king to c8. All right? And Magnus takes on e5. And here, black blunders. But it's shocking because it doesn't quite feel like that. I mean, fe, obviously fe, right? Now rook f8 is coming in. But white is winning now. For a second time, this one far more obvious than the last one. Now, I'm not saying that if I was playing this game, I would have seen it. All I'm saying is, between the 2 tactics, where one of them was like sacking a pawn and then, I mean, sacking a piece and then promoting and then trying to, you know, very complicated stuff on the queen side, this one's actually a bit more straightforward. White would love to go here, but then black blocks. And then I've already talked about how this endgame just doesn't, like, this is not a win. Trading all the pieces is not a win. You would love to do that. But if I asked you after bishop b8, well, if I asked you, how do we get this without the bishop blocking? You would say bishop b6. Takes rook a8. And if they don't take, like let's say they go here or here, well, then we take, and we take g7. And Magnus Carlsen is going to be a pawn up with a horrible counterpart of a structure. I mean, this is an easy win. He wins this against 2800s. He probably beats Stockfish in this endgame. I'm not even joking. Like, it's a completely winning endgame. Bishop b6 wins on the spot. They both missed it. They just both completely missed this move. I mean, obviously, black would not allow bishop b6 if he saw it, right? So somehow, I don't know, they both miss it. The best move here is to throw in this move first. That's what the computer says. So just not allow, but that's ridiculous, because if white takes, the computer is trying to say that you just lose a pawn against Magnus, but you open up your lines. And it's saying that because you have very active pieces, somehow you're not losing. Because you've also completely defended your king, which again, we've been talking about. The king is a liability. We saw that all the way up until Magnus had this opportunity to play bishop b6, and he just completely misses it. He plays takes, rook a8 check. Now, he doesn't play bishop a7. He continues to torture his opponent. Don't think that Magnus missing a win means that his opponent is off the hook. I would still be shifting bricks. Except not actually, you know what I'm trying to say. I don't know, kids are watching, I don't want to curse. King b7, b5, okay? Again, if at any moment you lose focus, you lose the game. Pawn takes pawn, rook c5, rook c4, you're going to lose a pawn, it's going to be a passed c-pawn. Black plays the best move. Black brings the rook into the action, b6, the king is just suffocating. So black activates the rook, still no real infiltration unless you go to the back rank, right? So rook a1, once again, the best move by black, rook f6, staying active on the 6th rank, looking for infiltration spots. Magnus plays g3, black plays h5. Flank pawn moves, as we've seen on the queen side, are actually very useful in endgames to take some space, especially if you're not creating a liability. Also, another idea of h5 is that you can sack the pawn. Because doubling your opponent's flank pawns like this, it just kills their structure. So h4 is a very common idea, and we will see it in a moment. King d2 check, so obviously we're not going to get a repetition. Bishop c5, and I told you, these moves to sack flank pawns to create activity, very common in endgames. Keep that in mind, because doubled h pawns don't scare anybody. Just the way doubled c pawns don't scare anybody, right? These pawns are not very good. So great idea. Magnus doesn't like it very much and allows a trade, so now the h pawn has simplified itself, right? And now black has given himself an opportunity to create a threat. So rook g6, rook d7. Again, never take your eye off the ball and hang mate in 1. I mean, if you were in this position, you might accidentally lose. So black once again plays the best move, which is stranding the king on the outskirts of the board. The king is actually better there than on c8. If you go to c8, you cut your king off. Do not cut your king off on the back rank. Like, in some ways, the IM is making this look very easy. In other ways, there is so much involved here. Do not cut your king off on the back rank. This is how your king dies. Your king needs to be out and open sometimes. In endgames, when he can't be attacked, yes. Rook d8, king b7. Again, of course, Magnus is not going to repeat. He's going to continue to try to torture his opponent. Now, how is he going to actually create a winning chance, right? c5. Suddenly, his opponent is like, you know what? I'm going to take this pawn, Magnus. If you don't mind, I'm just going to take it. Yeah, I know my pawn structure is really ugly, but it does the job. I'm going to take on b6. Magnus is like, oh, crap. I didn't actually think I was going to lose that pawn. g4, king b... Wait a minute. Black is a pawn up against the world champ. Admittedly, he has some of the worst pawns I've ever seen. He can't move any of them. And this is basically one pawn, if we're just being honest. You know, he's a pawn up. g5, king d7. Look at that. Again, don't take your eye off the ball. All of a sudden, you're in a bishop endgame down a full pawn. You're probably just lost. Maybe you can hold. But let's not. King d7, rook a8. Now black is attacking. King d2, king e6. The thing Magnus also has to balance in these games is like, if Magnus is playing Anish Giri, he'll probably just make a draw here. But if Magnus is playing a 2400, he's like, this dude is still gonna collapse maybe. He might be really nervous. That's the one advantage that Magnus always has over his opponents, right? So Magnus picks up the c-pawn, and now he's ready to take this and make this a rook endgame. And he does. We get a rook endgame in a moment. Rook endgame right here. So now it's rook and 2 versus rook and 2. White is gonna try to push. He's got 4 squares to go. Black has a little bit longer. So what do you do here? You gotta bring your king. Very important. b5, and now rook f3. Why? Well, because if you play b6, then I don't go passive. I mean, I could, but the thing about going very passive in endgames, again, we talked about this, king on the back rank. If you go very passively in endgames, like you play like this, then rook c6 comes, and then comes the king. So when you kill your own activity, you just lose. This is not what you want. Your rook can't be here. The point is that you want to go rook f6 to get to the pawn right before it becomes a queen. Activity is so important. The creation of threats and keeping a rook on a cutoff area where it defends your best thing. It cuts off the king. It targets this, right? That is so important. So rook c5 and king d6 played. The king is active. The king is very close. And again, b6 is not played here because rook f7, rook b7. At this point, passive might work, but still, not letting the pawn get as far as possible is better. So rook d8, Magnus goes for the g-pawn, and for the sacrifice of the pawn, black gets to activate his king. It's either going this way or this way. We have b6, rook f7, king d4, and that's it. Now he's going to win this pawn. And the last test that you have to succeed here with black is to correctly calculate that you can stop this pawn with a rook sack, and you can promote your own pawn. So let's see if that can happen. Rook b1, great, active from the back, and that's it. This is very nice, not getting in the way of your own pawn. He goes to g3 because he's either threatening to push or he's threatening to defend his pawn. Magnus plays rook f5, he pushes, rook b5, one last scary moment. You could calculate trading, but then you actually lose because it's check. Oh my god! Oh my god, you blew it. Oh my goodness. It comes down to the last possible square. And then this is a winning endgame. This is not the right pawn. You have to know queen versus one pawn endgames. Magnus sets a trap on the 74th move. Trap. At this level, it's not a trap, but you get what I mean. It's never too late to take your eye off the ball. The rook goes back because now it's actually okay to be passive and sacrifice. e3, king f4, preventing backside checks. And now b7, check, king e2, rook b8. Neither side can make progress, and black gives up his pawn to run back, get the other pawn, and do this. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Now, maybe when you saw the video, you were like, Magnus lost. All right, that would be actually kind of insane. Let me tell you how rare this is. First of all, this 2460 just drew a 2860 rated player. For this, Magnus lost 4.2 elo. In the entire Tata Steel tournament that he just played, which he played 12 out of 13 games because he had the forfeit win against Dubov, my man gained 3 elo. He won the tournament. But but he gained 3 elo. He just lost all of it and 1 more point drawing this game playing in his club championship. That is nuts. Also, this is his worst result against a sub 2500 rated player in 12 years. In 2010, he drew a 2500. Magnus, first of all, Magnus doesn't play a lot of sub 2500s because he's playing all these top level events. This is nuts. That is crazy. This just doesn't happen. So, yeah, 2900 is brutal, and even IMs can play the game of their life. So that was a really, really nice hold by Black. And what more to say? A crazy, crazy setback from the Norwegian IM that he delivers to Magnus. So 2500 is going to be tough, and these videos are kind of interesting because we always see Magnus dominate. So figured I would share this with all of you folks. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Get out of here.